I'll speak this evening on what happened in Gaza during December 2008 till January 2009, what Amnesty International called the 22 days of death and destruction. And I'll try to address, first of all, what happened, and second of all, the kinds of misrepresentations which were fairly commonplace in the American media about what happened. And then lastly, I'll look at the main outcome to date of the attack on Gaza, namely the report by Richard Goldstone and the repercussions from that report. So let me begin, and I gather from having sat in the last row that there are many diverse opinions represented in this room, which is a healthy phenomenon, I think. And so I look forward to having a genuine exchange of views with everybody in the room when my remarks are complete. You never know quite where to begin when you have to deal with an isolated event like the attack on Gaza. The Goldstone report begins with the ceasefire in June 2008. I'll go back a little further. I'll start with January 2006. In January 2006, there were parliamentary elections in the occupied Palestinian territories, and Hamas, the Islamic movement, won the elections which former President Jimmy Carter called completely honest and fair. He was among the international monitors in Gaza and the West Bank during the elections. He, like everybody else, said they were completely honest and fair. In reaction to the Hamas victory, to those completely honest and fair elections, Israel, backed by the United States and later the European Union, imposed economic sanctions on Hamas. In June 2007, Hamas foiled a coup attempt by the US, Israel, and some elements in the Palestinian Authority. After it foiled the coup attempt, it took full control of Gaza, and in reaction, Israel tightened its blockade of Gaza, a blockade that Amnesty International now called a flagrant violation of international law. The Goldstone report characterized this blockade as a possible crime against humanity. The former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson, she visited Gaza during this period when the blockade was tightened, that flagrant violation of international law. And Mary Robinson said, Gaza's whole civilization has been destroyed. I'm not exaggerating. In June 2008, Hamas and Israel entered into a ceasefire. And the ceasefire had obligations on both sides. On the side of Hamas, they were obligated to cease their rocket attacks on Israel. And on the side of Israel, it was obligated to gradually lift that brutal blockade of Gaza, that flagrant violation of international law, which was destroying a civilization. How did Hamas rise to its obligations? Well, we have a good source. The Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs posted a report in which it said, and now I'm quoting it, Hamas is careful to maintain the ceasefire. On the other hand, Israel refused to fulfill its obligation to gradually lift the blockade of Gaza. On November 4th, 2008, Election Day in the United States, with the attention of our media and our population, were riveted to the results of the historic election. Israel chose that day, not coincidentally, I don't think. It chose that day to break the ceasefire with Hamas. We have this on the word of Amnesty International, which in its annual report wrote, and now I'm quoting, "A ceasefire agreed in June between Israel and Palestinian armed groups in Gaza held for 4.5 months, but broke down after Israeli forces killed 6 Palestinian militants in airstrikes and other attacks on 4 November. Despite the fact that Israel broke the ceasefire, Hamas repeatedly, up until the end of December, the eve of the Israeli invasion, Hamas repeatedly stated that it was willing to renew the ceasefire, but on condition that Israel lift that illegal blockade, that flagrant violation of international law, which was destroying the civilization. Sarah Roy, a Harvard political economist, a really wonderful human being. It happens her mother was a survivor of Auschwitz concentration camp, a very decent person, and also a very respected scholar. She's widely regarded as the world's leading authority on the economy of Gaza. Sarah Roy wrote in December 2008, referring to Gaza, "The breakdown of an entire society is happening in front of us, but there is little international response beyond UN warnings, which are ignored. In response to Hamas's pleas to renew the ceasefire in exchange for lifting that blockade, Israel demanded an unconditional and unilateral Hamas cessation of rocket fire. And now the Palestinians in Gaza were faced with a fateful choice. They faced the prospect of a suffocating Israeli blockade, even if they ceased firing rockets. In effect, they were forced to choose between starvation and fighting. And Hamas opted for resistance, albeit resistance which was largely symbolic. The former Israeli army commander in Gaza, he said at the end of December, just before the hostilities began, he said, "You cannot just land blows, leave the Palestinians in Gaza in the economic distress they're in, and expect that Hamas would just sit around and do nothing." And about a week into the Israeli assault, the head of Hamas, Khaled Mishal, he wrote, "Our modest homemade rockets are our cry of protest to the world." And what were those rocket attacks, if not a plaintive message to a mute world? The message being, SOS, we're dying. SOS, we're dying.